neglecting to meet together, as the habit of some, but encouraging one another, all the more as you see the day drawing near. For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire that will consume the adversaries. Thank you for coming to my first, and I'm guessing now last, TED Talk around the table, as we like to call it. But I brought up this verse because these were the verses that haunted my youth. And what I mean by that is, it was always a question around what counts as not forsaking the assembly. Sunday morning was obvious, but what about Sunday night service? What about Wednesday night Bible class? Did we have to go to that, or were we forsaking the assembly? Well, what about youth devotionals? What about a youth devotional at another church? What about a gospel meeting at another church? I lived in the South. There were church services going on just about every single day of the week if you wanted to go. And so I grew up very scared about this whole not neglecting the assembly. I also went to a Christian college, and in a Christian college you have a devotional every single night, or at least the one that I went to has one every single night. Would I be skipping that and neglecting the meet together if I studied? Or what if I had a group that was meeting during that time? We're also living in a time in which there are very few people who actually come to church on a regular basis. Here in Las Vegas, it's about 5% of people who live in the city who attend a church service more than maybe once a month. And so we have to ask this question: is the lack of church attendance and the loneliness epidemic, which everyone, or I should say, there are thousands of scientists, social scientists, even our own government is calling this a loneliness epidemic for both young people and for older people. We've talked about this for the last 3 weeks. Are these two somehow connected? Well, for two reasons, I think the answer is no. The first reason is because I'm a math teacher, and we have actually just recently went through this with our students, and that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. So just because church attendance has gone down and loneliness has gone up doesn't necessarily mean that they are correlated. But there's a second reason for that. And that second reason is really because there are a lot of lonely people who go to church all the time. And how do I know that? Well, to be honest, for a very long time, I was one of them. Because loneliness isn't, as we've been talking about this entire series, loneliness isn't being alone or being isolated. Not being around others is not what makes us lonely. One of the main reasons why I struggle to connect with other people is because I love to entertain myself. And what I mean by that is, if I had to choose between a good story or a good game, or in reality a mediocre game or a mediocre story, or just really any story at all, or like connecting with someone, I went for the story just about every time. And to be honest, I'm not the only one who's done this. We have a nation of people who love to entertain themselves. I am not joking whenever I say this. Whenever I was writing my thoughts down for this talk, this literally came in my email. It was called the watch list, and the heading right underneath it said, "Are you ready to binge a few shows?" Binge watching has now become something that we talk about constantly. Yesterday, my family is in California. I'm home alone. I binged watched a television show. But the problem that I saw whenever I would do that, whenever I would not go to meet with other people, or if I would just go there just long enough, or just to get my ticket punched that I was there, what I was missing was what Priya Parker in The Art of Gathering says: gathering, the conscious bringing together of people for a reason, shapes the way we think, feel, and make sense of our world. When I would keep myself away from everyone and not really connect with them, what I was doing was I was preventing myself from shaping the world in a way that I felt loved and connected to others. And this brings me to a story, or I should say a parable, that Jesus told. It's found in Luke 15, and we know it as the story of the prodigal son. Now, I know many of you know it, but just in case you are a little fuzzy on at least some of the details, let me go ahead and tell you the story again. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger son said, "Dad, I can't wait until you pass on the business to us, and so I want you to go ahead and give me my portion of the business now." And I'm sure this took a long time for him to convince his dad of doing it, but finally his dad relented and gave him his part of the business. And his son immediately sold everything that he had get all of this money and traveled off to a far off land where he spent the entirety of his inheritance on prostitutes, on probably parties with lots of people who he shouldn't really have been spending a lot of time with. And there, he lost it all. Of course, whenever you're in a far-off country and you lose it all, and you don't know anyone, or at least you don't know anyone who's your friend because they love you, you're just a friend because you're the one paying for all the parties, and you don't have any family there, you are really, really alone. And he was so alone that whenever a downturn hit, a depression hit, he not only felt so alone that he couldn't get any friends, he also had to basically give himself over as a servant. And he had to serve a pig farmer. Now for us, pig farming's not that bad, but whenever you're a Jew, and pigs are the most unclean animal that you could ever touch. I mean, you can't even touch these things. And you're forced to feed them. You're going to feel alone. Because as we've been talking about, loneliness is this deep sense of dread at the persistent idea that you have no one and you are no one. The having no one, he got that. There are no one. This is where I kind of have a correlation or a similar idea with the prodigal son. I had a secret that I couldn't really tell anyone, and that secret was really that I was incapable of developing a close-knit community. And even if I was able to develop a close-knit community, no one would want to be in a close-knit community with me. I mean, if anyone could choose between literally anything else and spending time with me, they would choose anything else. And so I felt alone, even whenever I was going to all of these services, even whenever I was spending all of these times with people. And so for that reason, I felt like I had no one. Now, if you remember the story goes like this. The young boy comes to himself, or I should say the young man comes to himself, and realizes that not only is he worse off than the people of that area, he's worse off than his father's servants. And so he decides to go home, and he decides to give himself to his father as a servant so that he would have enough to eat, at least. If you remember the story, He's on his way home, and his father finds him, or his father sees him from afar off, and he runs off to him, and he falls down at his feet, and he begins to kiss him, and he begins to accept him as his own son again. Bring out the best robe, put a ring on his finger, bring sandals for his feet, go and kill the fatted calf. We're going to party tonight. And I would love to say that the story stops there and we have this great ending to it. But unfortunately, Jesus doesn't stop there. In fact, it's an ending of the story that I didn't even realize was there until I was probably close to being an adult myself. And that is the story of the judgmental brother. Let me read it to you. Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 25. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." My first attempt to getting a community, actually going to a group that tries to help people be in a community, didn't really go that well. Kind of because I was sitting in a room with people who had lost jobs because of what they had done. They had lost marriages or lost relationships because of what they had done. They had been arrested for things that they had done, and I hadn't had any of those things happen to me. And so while I was sitting in these groups, I just found myself going, why are we throwing a party for these people? Why not throw a party for me? I've been here this whole time. And yet, nothing. It was as if I was saying, but, I'm not doing this part. I'm not doing the neglecting part. Why am I not getting this no fearful expectation of judgment? I mean, if you don't get this, you don't get this. That's kind of what it was supposed to be. But what I didn't realize was that, as John Burke writes in No Perfect People Allowed, the devastating effect of sin is alienation. Alienation from God, from others, and from ourselves. God's prime directive is to love God and love people as his new family, because this heals our aloneness and restores what we lost. Now, what I didn't realize was that my problem was not that I wasn't there. My problem was that I was alienated from everyone. That I could sit in a room full of people and not feel connected to anyone. And so for that reason, I didn't really get any kind of healing. And it took a very long time before I was able to do much. And to be honest, I had kind of had that put into me, not necessarily overtly. I don't think any church actually says this, but the way that Priya Parker says that when we don't examine the deeper assumptions behind why we gather, we end up skipping too quickly to state forms of gathering. And we forego the possibility of creating something memorable, even transformative. You see, my problem was that I wasn't actually thinking, well, why am I doing this? I wasn't thinking, well, what's the point of this? The only thing that I was doing was sitting in a room thinking attendance was all that mattered. And so our gatherings kind of become this place where the prodigal son doesn't want to be there because he's going to feel judged by the judgmental brother. But even whenever the prodigal son does decide to come, the judgmental brother is sitting there going, well, what's with all the hubbub about this? But I want to notice something. Now, if you're a grammar Nazi, you probably already noticed this, and that is the fact that this started with a lowercase letter. In fact, I sent this to Jeremy before we came, and he corrected it, thinking that it was wrong. Nope, that's actually the correct way of doing this. Verse 25 starts that way. But notice, because it's a lowercase letter, it's not the beginning of a thought. If we want to go to the beginning of this thought, we can't start in verse 25. We have to start before that. In fact, we have to start in verse 23. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23 through 25 says, "Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works." Not neglect. Whoa, wait a second. Stir up one another to love and good works? I mean, I grew up in a King James church. It wasn't necessarily a dogmatic thing, but that's what we read. The King James Version actually says this: to provoke unto love and to good works. I mean, I had been to church for years, and I can't really say I'd ever been stirred up for love and good works. I mean, I had been stirred up before. I mean, I had been to churches where lots of things were provoked, but I don't know if I've ever seen a church where people were provoked to love and good works. And then it dawned on me whenever I finally realized this. My purpose for going was the not neglecting part. And I thought if I had the not neglecting part, I wouldn't have the fearful expectation of judgment. But what I forgot was that what I really needed was the stirring up of love and good works. You see, the not neglecting part is not about whether you get your check mark or not. It's about whether you are stirring up enough, whether you are actually with others. You see, we want you here not because we need the people. It's because if you're not here, who's going to stir us up to love and good works? If you're not here, how are we going to provoke you to love and good works? And so what I had to come to the understanding of, and what I finally had to realize, was that community is empathy plus vulnerability over time. You see, my struggle was that I didn't want to be vulnerable because I didn't think anyone would want to be part of me. And I couldn't have empathy on others because I was thinking, well, why would I want to be friends with these people? They're terrible people. But what I forgot was when communities learn to be the voice of God, looking for the potential God sees in each person, encouraging the development of each other, amazing things happen. People realize they're not alone and gain new courage to try new things. Eventually, I had something that happened to me to where I could no longer act like I was better than everyone. It was at that point that I realized I wasn't going to get any better until I started doing these things. And so a group of men and I, there were 4 other men and I, got together on a weekly basis, and we became vulnerable with each other. And by becoming vulnerable with each other and having empathy towards each other, all 5 of us received healing. All 5 of us were finally able to say we had a close-knit community. And we're still in connection, even to today. And so our ideal worth discussing today is this: you are worthy of community. Because it is in community where God stirs up hope and provokes love and good works. And just in case there are some of you who are still feeling like that older brother, let's say it this way: all are worthy of community. Because in community, God stirs up hope and provokes love and good works. Now, I don't want us to get too far ahead of ourselves, so I want to remind you that this is not the end of this, and without anything in before. What we've talked about before was that communion with God means faith and vulnerability over time. When you have faith in God, you can have communion with God. And through that communion with God, if you have intimacy and vulnerability over time, you can have companionship. We talked about how this is more than just companionship with someone who is in a emotional relationship with you, but it's more, you can have deep friendship, deep connection with close individuals. And if we put all three of these together, if you put communion with God together with companionship with a few, putting that together with community, and do that over time, there's no way for you to feel lonely. You are going to find the cure for loneliness, because the cure for loneliness isn't necessarily people. The cure for loneliness is presence.